Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, I want to talk about what would the Steelers going all in on their current crew look like if Omar Khan were to do that. We'll talk about that and take more of your questions here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. More on them later. All right, Steelers fans, hope you had a great weekend. We're going to be taking a lot of your calls over the next few weeks because, let's face it, there's not a lot going on with the Steelers, and training camp is about a month away. Yes, players report on July 23rd. So tomorrow will mark a month away from Steelers reporting to training camp. So we got some time before then, but you guys have been piling up calls for months, really, that I have not been able to get to. So throughout these next several shows, we're going to be answering a lot of those. We'll have guests on answering some of them as well and having a lot of conversations around that. But let's start this off with a question that I've been holding on to because I really wanted to talk about this. But the idea of the Steelers going all in and Omar Khan making big moves to kind of give them the best opportunity to win a championship with the crew that they've kind of had around for a while now. Here's Noah from Charlotte asking a question along those lines.
What's up, Chris? This is Noah from Charlotte, North Carolina. I feel like this past draft was kind of a filler draft for some holes, so next year they can trade picks away to get a quarterback. But in regards to Tuesday's episode with Allen, don't you think they owe it to guys like TJ and Cam to essentially put all their eggs in one basket and go get the number one quarterback on their big board, whether that be Arch, Sellers, or Nico, instead of settling for the third or fourth quarterback on their big board? Even if it means trading up pretty far in the draft, especially since there are probably going to be at least 3 or 4 teams, I'm assuming, ahead of them that need a quarterback as well. Love the show. Look forward to hearing your response. Have a good one.
Thanks, Noah. Appreciate you calling in. As always, you can call into the Locked On Steelers call-in line like Noah did at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get your question on the show just like we did Noah. So let's get to Noah's question here. So first, let's talk about the trading up process as far as the Steelers making such a move for their top quarterback. It is possible that their top quarterback might not be everyone else's when it comes to that situation. Like my top quarterback of this projected 2026 class right now is LaNorris Sellers. I think that he could be spectacular in the NFL. I think he has a lot of traits really going for him. I think he'd be dangerous. I think he's shown up in some big games in some big ways. And if you were to look at some rankings, they have Arch Manning, they have Garrett Nussmeier, they have even Clay Klubnik ahead. Some people have Drew Haller ahead of him. So it could be depending on that. But to your overall point, should the Steelers be commit to going all in to get that guy, whoever is their top guy on their draft on their draft board at the quarterback position, to score with the crew of TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, those guys in particular that have been true soldiers throughout their time with the Steelers, lifers, if you will, who have been with the team, been through some wars, and been through lots of struggles without really. Cam Hayward's had some good years with Ben Roethlisberger. TJ Watt saw like the tail end of the good years of Ben Roethlisberger in his early seasons. But, for most of the past several years, they've had minimum quarterback play. So to your point, I hear what you're saying there. But to me, it just depends on what going all in would mean to you. Because typically when this question gets asked, you think all in, it means go, like right now, if the Steelers were to go all in, they'd trade a bunch of picks for Terry McLaurin. They would get Aaron Rodgers every weapon known to man. They'd get Jalen Ramsey. They'd get whoever they could to win just for this year. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying go all in to get the quarterback that they really think is the case. Now, to note this, that means trading up in the first round. Let's look at all the times the Steelers have moved up in the first round in the modern era of the NFL. Now, for a long time, Chuck Noll had like a policy, like he wasn't doing that. He wasn't making moves. He was holding on to his draft picks and letting them develop naturally. And that kind of held for the Steelers for a long time until 2003 when the Steelers traded up to get Troy Polamalu. They had the 27th pick. They moved up to the 16th. I believe that they gave a third and a sixth round pick to make that move happen. And that was a rarity. I remember sitting with my grandfather, and he was like, they never trade up, so they think that guy's good. And, of course, that was Troy Polamalu. They went up and scored pretty big there. Later moves to trade up and get higher picks in the first round. They moved up to get Santonio Holmes in 2006. Obviously, that one paid off. But the last one, the one that didn't pay off was, of course, Devin Bush in 2019 when they moved up from 20th to 10th. I believe they gave up a first, a second, and a future, and a 2023 to get him in the 2019 NFL draft. Devin Bush looked like he was the guy initially. Then he tore his ACL, came back, and was never really the same, and that didn't work out. And then, of course, the most recent trade up in the first round is going from 17th to 14th to get Broderick Jones. We still have to see how that plays out over time. But you look at all those moves, it was often the Steelers weren't giving up a whole lot. This would be a different category of what the Steelers would do in the history of the NFL. And this could be the thing that might define the Omar Khan era, for good or for bad, is how they go about such a move. The thing is, when you go all in on a quarterback prospect or any prospect like that, you're putting a ton of weight in that guy having to be the thing that works out. And the fact of the matter is just that when it comes to drafting, as much as we all say we know things, like when I talk about players as far as what I expect, it's what I think, it's what I know or what I've learned about how teams see players and how important they see. Like, for example, I knew that defensive tackle was a priority for the Steelers because, as Noah pointed out, this is a filler draft. This is not the year to go get the quarterback and to say, hey, the window is now back wide open. This was the draft to bolster the roster in its weak spots and build a foundation so that when you do get that quarterback, you're much more ready to hit the ground running with them. But in this theoretical draft situation where they could trade up and get it, I think the biggest thing is, can they reasonably get this guy without folding away the future that they need to build with him? Because here's the other factor here. Let's say you get to the end of this season, 2025, right? And let's say some things don't work out. Let's say Joey Porter Jr. didn't emerge into that CB1 role that you thought he would. Let's say Broderick Jones maybe isn't. But like guys like Zach Frazier, Keanu Benton, Troy Fautanu, they're working on. I'm not picking on the 2023 class. I'm just using this as an example. And cornerback is still a big need. Wide receiver still a big need. Tackle may still be a big need if Jones isn't working out. And so you're sitting here saying, hey, do I go get the quarterback, or do I trust that the guy that we're really looking at falls to the position that we can reasonably get, so that I can use some of these later picks to keep bolstering the roster, and while also not putting all my chips on one player? That is the ultimate choice that the Steelers have to make eventually, is will they be so confident of a player that they will gamble serious draft capital to the point that could compromise future draft classes. That's something the Steelers don't typically do. They typically build for the future consistently, and they try to get the right guy that's within a reasonable reach. But again, this is the Omar Khan era. They might try to do things differently, and change can be good for the Steelers as far as trying to adapt for this era of the NFL. Personally, do I think they will? I think there will be a form of concession to go get that. They'll go get their guy, but I don't think it'll be like a first overall trade. I think that you're talking about probably in the bottom half of the top 10 picks, because I'd be willing to bet that the Steelers might be in a position where their guy, they might have a couple guys even that they think are, true potential franchise quarterbacks. When you look at that, they're going to say, okay, these are the guys we're looking at. These are who we understand are really looking at them. We just have to get in front of, X number of teams. And that could be what determines what's it worth to them to try to move up and get it. Now, to your point for TJ and Cam Hayward, TJ Watt and Cam Hayward, I think that both of them, do they deserve that kind of? Yeah, you'd love to see the Aaron Donald, Jerome Bettis type, ending for these guys, where they got to win a ring after a long storied career playing for their franchises, and being a career Hall of Famer that's celebrated in those areas. You'd love to see that for them. But at the same time, you got to make sure that you're doing right by your organization, because let's say that that we go through this season, and then LaNorris Sellers or Cade Klubnik or, Garrett Nussmeier or Arch Manning even. Let's say that, the guy, this class that's being heralded now has a rough year and you're not, and everyone's kind of like, and if you're a legitimate, your scouting department's like, we don't know about these guys. This is a shaky year. You don't then sell the farm for that. You do it when I think you're very sure about it. And it's going to come down to how strong is the scouting room for Omar Khan? How confident are they in a guy? Now, if they're that confident in some of these guys, I would get the feeling that they would do something like that. This team has proven to be aggressive in recent years. You think about, how much turnover has happened on offense, how aggressively they went at, say, what, we got it wrong with Kenny Pickett. Let's go get Russell Wilson. Let's trade for Justin Fields. You look at how different this offense was compared to just 2 years ago when you were thinking it was Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph for the next few years. And now you've already had 2 complete quarterback room flips in the last 2 years. Omar Khan has shown the tendency to be aggressive, to get things done. But of course, there's been nothing like trying to go get a franchise quarterback in the first round and trading away multiple high picks. But something tells me if his scouting department tells him, and if Andy Weidel and their guys, say, hey, that's the guy, they'll go and make such a move because I think that they want to be aggressive and they want to find that guy. So that's a good question, Noah. And to me, I think it's even less about TJ and Cam, and it's more just about, hey, they need to find that guy soon because they do have pieces on defense that still make them a more formidable defense, and they're building with young guys on offense. And the Steelers have had this thing where, as most teams do, you have time where your defense is really good and your offense is still developing. That was very much the late 2000s into the early 2010s. The Steelers offense was still figuring things out in the Mike Tomlin era, and it was in the mid 2010s when they did figure it out. But by that time, the defense had aged out and was they weren't terrible. They weren't a bad defense. They just weren't an elite defense anymore. And then by the time they became that elite defense in the late 2010s into the early 2020s, when I say elite, they were top 5 in back-to-back years. The offense fell off because Ben Roethlisberger's injury happened. And so bad timing happened with that. But we're trying to hit the sweet spot like they did in the 70s where they had an elite defense and an elite offense. And so that would be why you make that move, is if you really think that guy is there. Now, I think that's the whole thing, though, right? They have to know that guy, that they have to be that confident in that guy is there to make such a move. So to answer your question, Noah, I think they should, and I think that they even would if they truly think that the guy that they see, whoever it is, Klubnik, Sellers, Manning, whoever, if they think that that's the guy, they should go get it. And I think that Omar Khan will, because he's shown the will to be aggressive and to kind of break outside the mold of what typical Steelers front offices would do. But you got to make sure it is your guy and that you're willing to put your chips down on that, because that can define your legacy, and also that can send you out the door if you're wrong and you set back the organization by a lot more than just spending like a 20th overall pick like they did on Kenny Pickett. So thank you for the question, Noah. We got more questions to get to here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet every single day. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5, and if you hit, you get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet of $5 or more wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here by taking more of your calls on the Locked On Steelers call-in line. As always, it's 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. This next one actually is staying local here. We got Colin from Pittsburgh. Colin, take it away.
Hey, Chris, it's Colin from Pittsburgh. Been listening to the show for a few years now. I really like your stuff. I was just calling to ask if you think that the Steelers will sign Aaron Rodgers to additional years to possibly mentor whatever the quarterback they end up drafting next year. And I also was wondering if you had any way too early predictions and or preferences for who you'd like to see them maybe target in the first round of next year's draft. I know it's hard to predict that because we don't know when they'll be picking, but would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate you calling. Of course, calling like Colin did it, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Okay, so let's address the first part of this question. Aaron Rodgers sticking around for multiple years. Now, here's the thing. There would have to be several boxes to get checked for Aaron Rodgers, I think, to want to do this. Aaron Rodgers seemed like he's a guy who's kind of ready to retire. He's seen the bells and whistles. There's sometimes when you talk to NFL players, they get to this stage of their career where they're just being like, is it worth it? Because, man, the NFL is a stress on your body, and that is a lot. And especially when you're a guy like him, like, even guys that don't have his success where he's been a 4-time MVP, a Super Bowl champion, a 10-time Pro Bowler. He's seen he's seen everything he needs to see in the NFL, but maybe he wants to do just a little bit more. And that's what he's with the Steelers for. So the thing that would have to keep Aaron Rodgers to want to stay around, and we'll get to the Steelers side of should they want him in a minute here, but let's stick with Aaron Rodgers first. The thing that he needs to see is that he needs to see if this team is serious and ready to go, which means the offensive line needs to take that step up. We've been talking about that they could take that step up this year. That run game, it's present, so he doesn't have to always be the guy carrying the offense. The playmakers emerge. DK Metcalf looks like a true number one. Calvin Austin look like he's coming up. Roman Wilson maybe doing stuff, or maybe they go and get a wide receiver that really works for him. Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, they're a serious threat. But this offense is pretty good, and they're pairing with a defense that keeps them competitive. And they're a team that doesn't just sneak into the playoffs and win and gets bounced in the first round pretty quickly. They're a team that maybe gets to the divisional round, maybe gets to the AFC Championship game. I think that's the thing that Aaron Rodgers would need to see if he wanted to stick around. Because remember, it takes two to tango in this situation. It's not just about if the Steelers want it to happen, because Aaron Rodgers has to want it to happen himself. But what would the Steelers need to see if they'd want it to happen? Well, for one, I think Aaron Rodgers would be welcome to stick around if things work out. Like, if, let's say, the Steelers get 11 wins this year and they still don't win the division, but they beat the 5 seed in the playoffs, or the 4 seed in the playoffs, because they are the 5 seed. And then they go on the road in the divisional round and they play the Chiefs or the Bills or the Ravens or someone like that, and they pull off a win. Then I think that they might be like, hey, you know what? We can rock out with Aaron for another year as long as he feels healthy and he's not too much damaged goods. And then that way, when you draft your quarterback next year, you have an NFL MVP quarterback kind of still in the locker room, helping them out, keeping ready to go. And there's that situation for you. But that's the other thing you have to kind of, I guess, measure here is if the Steelers draft their quarterback of their future next year, do you want them to sit for a year behind what will be 42 and then eventually a 43-year-old Aaron Rodgers? That depends on how you feel like how ready these guys are. Some of these guys that are in this draft class, and kind of getting to the last part of your question there about who are some of the quarterbacks you're looking at. I've talked about guys that I like a lot. I really like LaNorris Sellers out of South Carolina. I really like Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU. Everyone loves Arch Manning out of Texas, of course, for the Manning bloodline. I think Nico Iamaleava could be interesting. Guys like Sam Leavitt could be interesting. There's other guys that can always pop up, right? Because there's always some guy that you're like, whoa, where did that guy come from? And their college team's fans knew about him, but the average NFL scout or person that's looking at draft classes might not have been as up on those guys. So the quarterback draft class has to play out first before we even get there, right? But if you're looking at that class, I like guys like Sellers and Nussmeier because I think that either one of those guys could be a guy who doesn't go first overall, maybe is in the conversation to go top 5, but slips outside of it because of other position players being so good, other quarterbacks being in this conversation, and then the Steelers can trade up just outside of the top 5, maybe just inside of the top 10, and go and get the guy that they think is the guy. And then you have the question that if you're getting a guy like that, like LaNorris Sellers, are they young? Are they a really young player that needs time to develop more because they're that raw? Or are they a more experienced quarterback? Are they a quarterback who's played enough at the college level to kind of be ready for just the adjustment to get to the pros and just kind of come out swinging? That's another decision that has to happen there. So I think there's just several factors here that play into whether or not you'd want Aaron Rodgers back. But I also think both sides are probably fine with whatever happens. And that's why they signed a 1-year deal in the first place. I bet that Aaron Rodgers is kind of like, I'll choose where I go for the rest of my career or if I want to retire. So if to answer the question about Aaron Rodgers, what would it take for him to stick around? It would take him playing really well, the Steelers playing really well, those two things meshing, and him saying, hey, you know what? I want to run this back. And the team saying, you know what? We'd like to run it back with you. But we're also still getting that quarterback next year because that is the ultimate plan. So I do think that's possible. I mean, it's not impossible to see the Steelers, if Aaron Rodgers makes him a better contender this year. And I'm not saying that he definitely will or anything. But it's not impossible to see the Steelers being like, hey, we'll ride back with that, but we're going to give, the quarterback that we think is the future a Patrick Mahomes season. Because remember, Patrick Mahomes didn't come out the gate starting. Alex Smith started over him for a time. And so for a year. And then eventually he took over and then he became Patrick Mahomes. And everyone was like, oh, my goodness, this guy is the truth. And so that's a possibility. But I do think that the Steelers are keeping their options open. That's why they didn't sign him to a 2-year or more deal as is. I think that that's something that when you look at how they've handled things, they're keeping their options open. They're staying available to be able to make moves, be shifty. And I think that's something that's good that Omar Khan's doing because this is the quarterback position is always tough to nail down. And you may have Aaron Rodgers right now, but you could have your future franchise guy next year if you get the draft right. So I do think that when it comes to this situation, the Steelers, they probably have a plan in place where if Aaron Rodgers does X, Y, and Z, they might ask him to come back. But I also think they're fully prepared for if he doesn't want to come back or they don't want him to come back, they have their plan B ready to go. And Mason Rudolph's signed with the team for 2 years. And then also you'll still have Will Howard. And then you can still draft your guy. And then you can just see, hey, who's gonna be the guy moving forward there. So lots of different angles the Steelers can happen there. But I don't think that the chances of Aaron Rodgers doing that, I just think that there's a lot of boxes to check. So it's tough to say right now, but that's something we will monitor because if we get the sense that, like, let's say through week 10, the Steelers are, 7-2, with their early bye week, they're 7-2 and they're looking really good. And Aaron Rodgers is feeling like, you know what, this could be something. And let's say they go and they have a good run. They don't make the Super Bowl or anything like that, but they look dangerous. Maybe Aaron Rodgers looks around and says, I want to do this again. I want to have a chance here. I think we got a shot here. I wouldn't put it past the Steelers to be open to making something like that work while still keeping their eye on the ball as far as picking future quarterbacks. So I think that all those things are possible to get done. Even if Aaron Rodgers does stick around for an extra year, though I still think it's not all that likely he will, but we will see as time moves on. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, want to answer another question about just how good Broderick Jones has to be. And I like the way this was framed. So we'll talk about what that was next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We'll keep it here with your questions. As always, call in like we've had several of our callers call in every day, 412-223-6644. When you call that number, it takes you to voicemail. Be sure to leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute, and we'll try to get you here on the show as soon as we can. This next caller calls with a question from behind enemy lines. Greg from Cincinnati, Ohio. Take it away.
Hey, Chris, this is Greg calling from enemy territory, Steelers fan living in Cincinnati. First off, want to say thank you to you and all of your regular contributors like Alan, Nick, Jenna, and Mike. You guys put in a lot of effort to put out a good product and just want to say thank you guys. So my question today revolves around Broderick Jones and the left tackle spot. a lot of talk about how he'll mature, how he'll adapt, how he'll grow in his natural position. And that's great. It's good for discussion. But for me, it's a very simple question. Will he be better than Dan Moore? That's what we need to know. So again, thanks to you. Thanks to all your contributors. Really appreciate the show and all you guys do. Here we go.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you calling in as always. 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Appreciate people like yourself calling in with good questions to the show. So let's look at it this way. So you bring up a good point. The question of can Broderick Jones just be better at left tackle than Dan Moore had been? I think that's certainly something that when you look at how this the Steelers' future offense wants to be, they need Broderick Jones to be significantly better than Dan Moore was. And statistically speaking, he kind of wasn't, especially in pass protection. Last year, Dan Moore allowed just 41 pressures and 12 sacks. Broderick Jones, 45 pressures and 11 sacks. So both of them were up there as far as allowing the most sacks in the NFL last season, and that's not good. But again, Broderick Jones was on the right, not on the left. He's talking about being more comfortable with being on the left. He's also slimmed down a bit. But I also think it's important to remember part of what they knew with Broderick Jones was that he was going to be a project. His lack of experience, his rawness coming out of Georgia. You knew he was going to take time to develop some of the skills that he needs to be in his game. But what he does bring to the table is he's athletic as all get out, and he has the size that you want. He just has to keep adapting to it. And I point back to remind people just how different, like when you look at Broderick Jones in the draft process, and why he was so tempting for so many people to want to go get, comparing him to Dan Moore, their all-time relative athletic scores, Broderick Jones a 9.52, which is in the elite range, and Dan Moore Jr., not a bad one at 8.88, but of course not a 9.52 for Broderick Jones. But Broderick Jones ran a faster 40-yard dash, beat Dan Moore in all the splits, didn't actually have a higher vertical jump. And that was the one thing that Dan Moore had, was the jumps were better for him. But I think when you looked at everything that Broderick Jones could do and could potentially do, I think there's a lot more of that potential there to be unlocked for Broderick Jones than there is Dan Moore Jr. So could he be an upgrade? Yeah, he could be an upgrade, and he should be an upgrade. That's the whole point of this. But again, that's why you're kind of looking at trying to get him. Like, again, Broderick Jones just turned 24 years old last month in May. So like when you're thinking about how that works, Dan Moore Jr., he'll turn 27 in September. Broderick Jones is still the youngest offensive lineman that's starting for the Steelers right now. And I think that there's time for him to grow into being that guy who they expect to be the dude at left tackle. And so it's going to take time, but I think he can get there. And I've seen him, challenge himself to be better in those situations. I've seen him challenge himself. He challenged himself right now. Like I said, he lost 20 pounds going into OTAs, and he was seeing how he played in it, and he felt really good about it. So, maybe there's some adjustments there. But for me, the bottom line for Broderick Jones is, can he protect better? Can he can he be more consistent in the run blocking? Because if he's more consistent in run blocking, that's a big part of why they got him, because he can be a mauler with his size. And that's where the Steelers could see a big difference between him and Dan Moore Jr. Dan Moore Jr. had occasions where he could get nasty, but when you go get a Broderick Jones, I think that's what you're going to get, is to get a guy that can do that exactly. Be nasty, be a leader, be vocal. And if he can be those things, he'll be the guy, and there won't be much questions after it. But to your point, needs to be better than Dan Moore Jr., because Dan Moore Jr. has been this team's left tackle for a while now, and it just hasn't worked, and no one's wanted it to work. It's been rough. So I think that when you look at how these guys are going to line up this year with the offensive line and how they're trying to put things together, I think the Steelers they're going all in on Broderick Jones to try to let him develop this year. We'll see where that stands versus Dan Moore's third year in the league, where the Steelers were kind of clear, like, hey, we're not extending this guy. We're not making long-term plans. We're planning to build elite talent around there, not spot talent. And I think that's where they kind of lived with Dan Moore as a fourth-round pick from the past. But There you have it. There are my answers to your questions. I do think Broderick Jones can be the upgrade. It will be about, can he follow through on being more consistent the way Pat Meyer has talked about when we've talked to him during OTAs and minicamp. That's all for today's show here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. All social medias have the same handle everywhere, at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Break it down to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow with more on the Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.